Welcome to the APMM Virtual Conference 2021. We'd like to take a minute to highlight one of our excellent conference sponsors, B9 Creations out of Rapid City, South Dakota. A leader in providing highly precise and affordable 3D DLP printers, B9 Creations takes a proactive role to provide solutions to the problems model makers face. Let's hear more from B9 in a conversation about the Core 5 Series XL.
Hello, I'm Danny with B9 Creations, a global provider of high-precision additive manufacturing solutions, whether you need one part or 100,000. We serve high-precision applications from model making to medical, aerospace, research, and more in nearly 70 countries around the globe. You can see a few of our partners here, from 3M to Medtronic, Pella, and Johnson & Johnson. Today, you're going to hear from Adrian at Actuonics on leveraging 3D printing from R&D to short-run production, all while shortening his product iteration cycle from 6 weeks to 2 days and saving thousands in the process. Plus, see how he opened up new revenue streams from customers by partnering with them from low-volume 3D printing to high-volume injection molding.
So what made you guys want to buy the XL? What solution did it provide for your business?
Yeah, so it provided a couple solutions for us. So the first one was directly to me, which I do a lot of research and development, and we use external 3D printing services, outsourcing them. And we're finding that we're spending quite a bit per year on those services. And it still takes some time to get those in-house. So it'll still take about a week to 2 weeks for those parts to arrive. So it adds that lead time for me, and it makes it more difficult to do a lot of iterations where bringing a printer into house, I can actually do say 10 to 20 parts and have them all slightly different, as opposed to do that outsourcing, it's going to be extremely expensive and kind of unfeasible for us. Mm-hmm. So at the time, we'd probably get 5 parts done outsourced. But now bringing this in, I'll be able to do essentially 100 parts in the same time. Yeah, because all our parts are very small, so the form factor of the B9 is great for us because we can actually fit 20 plus parts on them. So the advantage on the R&D side was the speed and having the machine in-house, so we can do multiple iterations on parts to get the design solidified a lot faster. And then the second thing is, which we're seeing probably more of the growth that we'll see with the business, is we're getting a lot of customers who are asking for small variations of our actuators. And we can't typically offer a low minimum order quantity to them because most of our products and parts are made overseas at our facility. So we have minimum order quantities upwards of 200 to 500 that our suppliers put on us. So having this in-house, I can now lower our MOQ down to say 10 to 50 parts, and I can now do a lot more custom work for these smaller smaller companies using our actuators.
It's pretty incredible. That's really cool to hear not only how it's going to positively impact your business, but your customers as well.
Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we kind of see the whole line of it. And then for me, because I'm doing all the R&D, it's really nice that I'll be able to have the machine in-house to do all that. Yeah.
So you mentioned speed and build volume. Were there other important criteria that you used when choosing a printer, resolution, of use, those kind of things?
Yeah, so all our parts and our actuators, we're focusing on making them smaller, more compact, and stronger. So a few factors were precision and accuracy of the printer. So as we get down some of our parts, I'm calling out tolerances that are plus or minus 0.03 millimeters, which the B9 has on our sample parts that we've received have gotten down to that tolerance. And from discussing with other printer companies, a lot of them aren't able to make it down to that spec. And that was one of the driving factors for us deciding on the B9, was that added precision that we needed for our parts. And as we move forward, we wanted to make sure we had a unit that was going to work for us in the future. So that's kind of why we didn't go with one of the 550s, but we're actually hoping to we're getting the XL unit. because of that extra build volume, and it'll allow us to, expand further without having to jump to another machine and upgrade.
Here you can see our entire additive manufacturing workflow. If you're interested in anything you've heard today and want more information, a product demo, a sample or service bureau run, or even a conversation with an additive manufacturing expert on your next project to understand how we can enable your success, please reach out to us at b9c.com/modelmaking.
From everyone on the board of directors and your president, Jill Kennick, we are excited for you to join us for this valuable workshop. In today's session, Will Strange, senior lecturer at the Arts University Bournemouth, will be diving into his research surrounding what makes a model maker and how it differs around the globe. If you have any questions, Will Strange, as well as an APMM representative will be available in the chat, and we encourage you to discuss the concepts and ideas presented with the other attendees. The chat will be open until the end of the hour, and after the workshop has completed, we will have an open Q&A for the remainder of the time. And with that, onward!
Hello, my name's Will Strange. I'm a senior lecturer at the Arts University Bournemouth, where I teach model making and design to undergraduate students. We offer a 3-year honours degree program specialising in general model making, and a design program that's very hands-on and offers plenty of opportunity for making and prototyping. As VP for Education with the APMM, I help to coordinate educator and student membership and offer advice about academic and education themes when needed. Before becoming a teacher, I made my living as an architectural model maker in and around London, and I continue to operate a small workshop at my home near Bournemouth. Today, I'm going to tell you the story of a study that I conducted as part of my master's degree in creative thinking at the University of Central Lancashire. I investigated the abilities that are essential for professional model makers to have. The results of this study suggest those that are the most essential abilities for professional model makers, and I'll present these later. But first, here's some background. The BAE model making program at Arts University Bournemouth, AUB, has always been focused on preparing students for work as professional model makers. We constantly, if informally, evaluate developments in the industry and adjust what we deliver to students accordingly. There is discussion at the moment about the relevance of higher education. Some argue that programs are not producing graduates with the right skills for work in many industries. There are calls for courses to be judged and ranked on how they prepare students for real-world careers. A very high graduate employment rate suggests that we're doing okay, but I wanted some real evidence to show what abilities we should focus on teaching on our course. I conducted research at the last APMM conference in Grand Rapids during 2018, and I'm grateful for the support that I received from APMM members, and here's a chance for me to say thank you for that input and for your support, and to share the results of that study. After completing the study, it was written up and it formed part of my submission for this master's degree in 2019. So how does this all fit into my study of creative thinking? Well, some may not think of model making as a creative discipline. After all, model makers traditionally follow other people's drawings to create copies of other people's ideas, right? Well, not really. What does it mean to be creative? How do we define creative? How do we define creativity? It's widely agreed that to be creative means to be making something which is both novel and useful. Something that's creative should be new in the world and able to perform some task that has a use for somebody. Models are both novel and useful, therefore they're creative. They require creative thinking to produce them. What do other people think about this? Well, it turns out very little academic research has ever been done to explore what it is that model makers are or what they do. In the book Modeling Messages, Karen Moon has this to say about professional model makers. Despite the limelight bestowed on their creations, these makers remain shadowy figures. Who are they and how they are trained is something of a mystery, but crucial to understanding their productions. Is she correct? Are we really so little understood? Writing about those making the famous New York World's Fair models in 1939, Robert Hoyt said, "Model making, it appears, is essentially the adaptation of numerous tools and materials to purposes for which they were not originally intended. Thus, the success of the model maker often depends upon his imaginative use and ingenious adaptation of available tools and materials." It struck me that this description could be equally relevant today, and that if I could prove this, I might go some way to addressing Moon's point about how little we are understood. I imagine that all model makers have a good idea of what it takes to do what they do. If asked, we could make a list of the abilities that we need. These lists may be guided by our professional experience. They would each be slightly different depending on circumstances, but they'd likely be pretty similar. I began by surveying existing published lists of these abilities to define an established opinion about the abilities that model makers need to have. A top 10 of these abilities was then tested by asking the opinions of participants with a questionnaire. I began by looking for opinions about the abilities that are important to model makers, looking for information from careers advice, from job adverts and job descriptions, from job surveys, from university curricula, and information from professional bodies, notably the APMM, and specifically Hal Chaffee's article about the 10 skills of the model maker. For this, thank you, Hal. Of the sources that were initially surveyed, the university curricula were especially interesting to me, as this offered a way to compare how we think about model making here at the Arts University in Bournemouth with other institutions across the country and maybe across the world. Some of the careers advice websites were frankly so basic as to offer no real advice at all, and by far the most impressive is an organisation called ONET. If you don't already know of it, let me quickly introduce you to it. Here's an example of the kind of information that helped me in the early stages of this study, and to introduce you to something that may be interesting for you to know more about. This is ONET, the Occupational Information Network. ONET is an American database that attempts to analyze and define every occupation. The results are available to browse online, and it has an amazing amount of detail. ONET lists two different kinds of model makers: model maker working in metal and plastic, and model makers working in wood. They're very similar. Indeed, we, the APMM, may have a case to ask them to reconsider these and the two kinds of pattern makers that they list, given how much we know about our industry has developed in recent years. After counting which abilities were mentioned most often, I ordered these to make a top 11. This is of more benefit to those able to pause this and read the list, I guess, but here they are. Reasoning, familiarity with tools and equipment, originality and ideas, spoken communication, focus and attention, problem solving, understanding of speech, knowledge of technologies, visualization, understanding of writing and text, and manual dexterity. So at this point, I'd gathered together the range of published opinion about the abilities of model makers. I had studied published sources, I had counted their mentions of each ability, I'd arrived at a ranking for those abilities. I then randomized the order of those and listed them in a questionnaire. This was my initial survey of a published opinion. In theory, if each of these sources are correct about the abilities that model makers need, there should be no difference when this is tested in the real world with sources that could be considered experts. This is where you came in, perhaps completing a questionnaire for me. Questionnaires were completed by participants between the APMM conference in Grand Rapids in the USA and the New Blades event in London in the United Kingdom in 2018. First, I got on a plane. I flew to the APMM conference in the USA. There, I figured that by being members of the APMM and engaged enough in their profession to attend the conference, attendees could be considered to be knowledgeable about their field. Outside of the UK, the USA probably offers the greatest number of professional model makers for me to talk to. At home here in the UK, participants were identified from personal experience and from their regular attendance at the annual New Blades event. New Blades is a model making graduate recruitment event and quite a social event for professionals in and near the UK. It was assumed that those attending the New Blades event would likely be active in the model making industry, involved in recruitment, and personally interested in the industry enough to support my study. Each participant was asked to note how they agreed that particular abilities were essential to working as a professional model maker. Some participants responded via email between the two events. All completed the same questionnaire. Questionnaires were completed anonymously and no personal data was collected. In total, 80 participants took part, 32 in the USA, 48 in the United Kingdom, and they had a combined experience of around 1,000 years. Data was collected and analysed, and all of the abilities ranked by giving each a score, dependent on whether participants agreed or disagreed that that ability was essential. We can see that most participants felt that all of the abilities being studied were pretty essential, but nevertheless some conclusions can be drawn. Overall, the study suggested that this is the top 11. Problem solving is suggested to be the most essential ability for model makers, followed by visualization and reasoning to make our top 3. Remember, this list should not imply that understanding speech and originality and ideas are the least important abilities to model makers, only that they're the least essential of those being studied. Here, the grey bars represent the position of each ability in the top 11 of my initial survey of published opinion. Blue bars represent the positions of each of those abilities where they came in the survey overall, after averaging the opinions of all the participants. The higher the bar, the more times the ability was noted as being essential. Reasoning, knowledge of tools and equipment, and originality and ideas were the expected top 3 based on my initial survey. Results of the study suggest that reasoning is important and that knowledge of tools and equipment is too, but both less than expected. The importance of originality and ideas is a big surprise to me though. My survey suggested that it's the 3rd most important ability, but the study puts it way down in 11th place. Here are the results for the abilities that show the most unexpected results. Note how originality and ideas is wildly different from what the initial survey suggested, and how everyone agreed that problem solving is the most essential ability for professional model makers. And here's the headline result of my study. These are the 3 most important abilities for professional model makers, according to the results of my study. Let's think about what the results of the study might mean. It was a surprise to me that originality and ideas was consistently suggested to be much less important than my initial survey suggested it should be. My reason for doing this study was an interest in model making as a creative discipline, and that ability came in last place for my study. Perhaps model makers don't consider what they do to be creative. Perhaps that creativity is there, but taken for granted. Manual dexterity was suggested to be the 11th most important ability in my initial survey. Participants in the study suggested it's far more important than that. Is this an illustration of that cliche of model makers being patient and steady-handed as they work on their tiny scale models? Perhaps the careers advice that I surveyed took this for granted, and the university curricula was more interested in the theoretical side of the discipline. My questionnaire asked participants to note their level of experience and whether they practiced model making in the USA, in the UK, or somewhere else. Was there a clear difference of opinion between model makers in the USA and the UK? Do those with more experience value different abilities to those who are new to the profession? Well, not really. Certainly there were no significant differences in the results. If pushed, I could hint that those with more experience put more importance on reasoning and focus and ideas, and the less experienced value technology a little more, but the differences are very slight. Participants who practice model making in the USA considered reasoning, knowledge of tools and equipment, and understanding of writing and text to be more essential than those practicing in the UK. And UK participants considered understanding of speech, knowledge of technologies, and manual dexterity to be more essential than those practicing in the USA. Informal discussion with participants after the completion of their questionnaires highlighted that those practicing in the USA were more likely to be involved with product prototyping and more industrial forms of model making, while UK participants were more likely to be working in architecture, exhibition or theming, or perhaps in the entertainment industries in film and TV. Alongside the differences above, and with understanding of the different kinds of models that would be required in these industries, this might imply that USA participants consider model making to be more of a technical exercise, more closely related to engineering perhaps, and that UK participants potentially view their work as part of the creative industries, emphasizing thinking skills over knowledge of tools and equipment. Participants with more experience considered reasoning, knowledge of tools and equipment, and manual dexterity to be more essential than those who had less experience. Compared to those with more experience, participants new to model making considered understanding of speech and understanding of technologies to be more essential. This could imply that with experience we value more highly an understanding of tools and the ability to apply them effectively, and that as we begin in the profession and have less experience, we value communication skills and the use of newer technologies. It could be suggested that those with less experience value knowledge of technologies more than manual dexterity. Those with 20 years or more experience could have developed their abilities before many rapid prototyping technologies were available, and though they may value this development, they consider the fundamental or traditional abilities to still be important. Those with less experience may have joined the profession after these technologies were adopted. With no experience of working without them, they may consider them to be more fundamental than those traditional tools and materials. It's interesting to note that the top 3 abilities suggested by the study are not specifically model-making skills. They're not subject-specific. In creativity research, we consider skills and abilities to perhaps be either subject-specific, that is quite unique to any discipline, or creativity-relevant, that is general skills which are applicable to all disciplines. Is it more important for model makers to have these general thinking abilities or to have specific model making skills? There's a proven link between creativity and problem solving. We use creative thinking to solve problems when we consider all the possible ways we could approach a problem before trying some and arriving at a solution. Divergent thinking ability is very often linked to creative thinking and said to be a central feature of creativity. Perhaps as model makers we consider what we do to be problem solving, but we don't perceive it to really be creative. Do you consider yourself to be creative? Is your work as a model maker a creative activity? Perhaps we can discuss what that means. Results suggest insight about professional model makers and their work, suggestions about what creativity research might explain about this discipline, and ideas for where future research might be focused. Here are some of those model makers that Hoyt described in 1939, and some students working in our studios at AUB today. They're using very different tools and materials, they're in very different settings, but they're using very similar abilities in their work. What we do is complicated, not just because our work requires a rare balance of knowledge and tools, but we apply a very wide range of problem solving, tacit knowledge, and other thinking skills alongside those physical abilities that enable us to use the tools and materials effectively. If originality is not recognized as an essential ability, perhaps model makers don't recognize their creativity as the generation of ideas, but as solving problems with the tacit knowledge that they have. Together with visualization and reasoning at position 2 and position 3 at the end of my study, this suggests that Hoyt's quote is indeed still relevant today. It is more important for us to be adaptable, to be ingenious, and to be creative than to have any specific technical knowledge about materials and tools, etc. The most definitive conclusion here is that the most essential ability for model makers may be problem solving. I'll end here, as I began, with a hats off to Robert Hoyt, who seems to have recognized long before anybody else just what professional model making is all about. Thank you.
And now on to the Q&A. If you haven't already, head over to the chat, either to your right if you're viewing on a desktop, or below if you're on a smartphone, and join the discussion with the presenter and your fellow model makers. When you are ready, or after the session ends, you can head to the APMM Zoom meetup for further discussion or general information from an APMM representative. This Zoom meetup will be open all day from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. For future sessions, head back to the conference schedule page for dates, times, and the appropriate link for each session. And as you discuss, we want to thank the companies and individuals that have supported the APMM and our conference efforts with their donations after we had to postpone our in-person conference last year. Your support means a lot to this organization, and it helped make this conference a reality. Find the names of our amazingly generous conference donors on the screen now. Thanks for coming to this session. We hope you enjoyed it.